Christmas morning, Oregon, 2022. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, but it couldn't soften the sting Charlotte felt in her chest as she stood on the porch of the house she once helped save. Her breath curled in small, defiant clouds in front of her, fogging her glasses as she looked up at the familiar wreath. It was the same artificial one from last year, slightly tilted, the gold bough faded from weather and time. She had picked it out herself 3 Christmases ago at the town craft fair. In her left hand she held a tin of oatmeal cookies, Mason's favorite, the kind with little chocolate chips she added just for him. In her right, a neatly wrapped gift, a beginner's telescope, chosen after he'd told her he wanted to see Saturn's rings like in the book. She wore the snowflake sweater he loved, even though it itched and made her feel like a walking Christmas cliché. She'd worn it hoping it might make him smile if he saw her through the window, hoping it would make her feel like this wasn't a mistake. Then came the creak of the front door. Scarlett stood there, her hair tied back in a tight knot, robe cinched around her like armor. No makeup, no expression, just frost in her voice. "You're not welcome here," she said. "No, Merry Christmas." No smile. Not even a fake one. Charlotte didn't flinch. Not anymore. Behind Scarlett, Charlotte could hear the faint buzz of cartoons from the living room. She thought, hoped, she might hear Mason. A small voice calling for her like last year. Like the year before. "Is that Grandma?" A tiny voice echoed from within. Scarlett shifted her body, blocking the view. Nathan's still sleeping. It was a rough night. Charlotte nodded, more to herself than to Scarlett. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. She simply lifted the tin and the wrapped box like offerings and said softly, "I just came to drop these off." "Leave them on the step," Scarlett replied coldly, and began to close the door. Charlotte moved her foot forward, gently but firmly. "Scarlett," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "my name's on this mortgage. I signed on to help your family. Don't forget that." Scarlett's eyes narrowed. "You always bring up Thanksgiving. Or the barbecue. Or how you saved us from foreclosure like it earns you a seat at every table." "It used to," Charlotte said, stepping back. "But you stopped setting a place for me long before today." Scarlett didn't reply. The door closed with a click. Not slammed, not violent, just final. Charlotte turned slowly and walked back to her car parked across the street. She hadn't expected to stay long. She hadn't expected to be invited in either. Not this time. But she had come anyway, because that's what people who love show up do, even when they know they won't be let inside. Inside the car, she placed the gift and cookie tin on the passenger seat. Her hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper. The kind of tremble that comes from holding back a tidal wave of emotions. But it wasn't sadness. Not anymore. It was resolve. She sat for a moment, engine off, staring at the house. Behind that front window, Mason might have been looking out. Or maybe Nathan. But it didn't matter. Neither came to the door. Scarlett spoke for everyone now. Charlotte turned the key, fired up the heater, and drove. Not toward home. She didn't know what that meant anymore, but just away. Through town, past empty diners and quiet neighborhoods where other families were probably unwrapping gifts and fighting over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. Her apartment wasn't home. Not without Mason. Not with that framed photo of him from last Christmas still sitting crooked on the shelf. But she went there anyway. Inside, the space was quiet. Too quiet. She turned on the TV just to fill the silence, an old Christmas special she'd seen 100 times, and poured herself half a glass of boxed Merlot. The roast she'd cooked the day before still sat untouched on the counter. She'd hoped, ridiculously, that someone might call. That maybe they'd change their minds. They hadn't. She unwrapped the gift meant for Mason. The telescope was small, but functional. She smiled faintly, imagining his eyes lighting up, seeing the craters on the moon. She set it gently next to her untouched dinner plate. Then, with careful fingers, she picked up the picture frame, the one of Mason in his reindeer pajamas, frosting all over his face, hugging her legs like she was the center of his universe. She stared at it for a long while before whispering, "Where did I go, Mason?" Her voice cracked just slightly. She blinked quickly and turned away. She found her phone and called Mason's old tablet contact. Straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice tender, trembling. "It's Grandma. I hope you're having a good Christmas. I miss you. I love you so much. You can call me anytime, okay?" She ended the call, set the phone face down, and stood there in the kitchen. The cookies still smelled warm somehow, even though they had never been eaten. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She walked to the bookshelf, reached behind a stack of old bills, and pulled out the folder, the mortgage documents. Her name, her signature, and then something else. A page she hadn't seen before. A refinance form. A signature that didn't match her own. Slanted wrong. Pressure too light. Her stomach turned. A crime hiding in plain sight. She sat down at the table, pulled out a pad of yellow legal paper, and began writing. December 25th, 2022, Scarlett forged my name. Nathan may have known. I co-signed for love, and they cashed it in for convenience. They closed the door, but I still have the keys. Not just legal ones. The emotional ones, too. I'm not leaving Mason behind. I won't disappear quietly. Charlotte paused. Her fingers were still. The air was still. Everything was still. Then she wrote the next line. Tomorrow I fight back. Winter night, Oregon, December 25th, 2022. The apartment was colder than Charlotte remembered. Not because the thermostat had failed, she always kept it at a modest 68, but because something inside her had shifted, something that no heater could touch. She placed the tin of cookies and the telescope box gently on the kitchen counter, as though still unsure whether to let go of them completely. Her snowflake sweater still held the faint scent of cinnamon and pine, and it clung to her like a memory that didn't know where else to go. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in a long time. Not really. Her tears had been rationed year after year, as if she could afford to waste them only on funerals or milestone heartbreaks. But tonight, the ache wasn't sharp, it was wide, like a canyon in her chest. She poured herself a half glass of Merlot, one of those $4 ones from the corner store, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the photo on the bookshelf. Mason, last Christmas, in his red pajamas, hands sticky from decorating cookies, his arms wrapped around her legs as if she were the safest place on earth. She had been once. Charlotte lifted the glass to her lips but didn't drink. She set it down, untouched, and walked slowly to the hallway closet. Her steps echoed across the laminate floor, hollow and precise. She reached for the top shelf, brushing aside a box of old holiday decorations, and pulled out a thick manila folder, worn, slightly bowed in the middle from years of storage. She carried it like something sacred. This was her proof. Her pen, her ink, her name. Sitting back down, she opened the folder, the paper inside crackling faintly in the silence. The original mortgage agreement was there. Dated, signed. Her name clear, proud, sturdy. She remembered that day. Nathan and Scarlett had come to her in desperation. The bank had denied their refinance application because of poor credit and mounting debt. Nathan had barely looked her in the eye as he mumbled, "We just need a little help, Mom." Charlotte hadn't hesitated. She told herself it was what families did. You show up. You put your name on the line. Now she flipped through the stack slowly, methodically. Tax documents, insurance confirmations, letters from the bank. Then a newer packet, refinancing documents she didn't recognize. She blinked at the top page. Her name was printed on the signature line. Her signature was there. Only it wasn't hers. Not really. Charlotte stared at it for a long time. The swoop on the C was too wide. The angle of the T didn't slant like hers. She hadn't written this. She was sure of it. The date, May 9th, was right after her birthday, a day she had spent alone, watching reruns of Jeopardy! And drinking chamomile tea. She hadn't signed anything that day. She hadn't even left the house. A slow burn started in her chest, like a match had been struck inside her ribs. Scarlett. It had to be her. Charlotte stood abruptly, her knees stiff from sitting too long. She moved to the drawer in the hallway where she kept old receipts and utility bills and pulled out a Christmas card envelope from 3 years ago. Inside was a notarized copy of her original mortgage signature. One Joan had insisted she keep, just in case, Charlotte held it next to the forged signature. There was no mistaking it. The forgery was crude, practiced maybe once or twice but careless in its confidence. A child might not see it, but she did. A mother always knows her own hand. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage that had waited far too long for a reason to speak. Scarlett hadn't just cut her out. She'd used her. Charlotte placed the two documents side by side, took a picture with her phone, and texted Joan. "Need your eyes on something. Mortgage fraud. Can I come by tomorrow?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course. Early okay?" Charlotte nodded to herself and whispered into the silence, "Good." She felt something shift again. But this time, it was in the other direction. Not a collapse, but an awakening. She wasn't going to be erased. She wasn't going to sit on the sidelines while someone rewrote her place in her grandson's life with lies and stolen signatures. She poured the wine down the sink. Not in sorrow, but as an act of cleansing. She washed the glass slowly, then returned to the table, yellow notepad in hand. On the top, she wrote, "Facts, not feelings." Then she began. 2017, signed as co-owner to Save House. 2019, Scarlett started excluding me from school events. 2020, Nathan stopped calling on birthdays. 2021, Thanksgiving invite rescinded because of limited space. May 9th, 2022, forged refinance date. December 25th, 2022, told I wasn't welcome. Mason behind the door. Each date was a stitch, pulling tight the narrative of betrayal she had tried so long to deny. Somewhere between line 5 and 6, her pen paused. She tapped the ink gently against the pad and stared out the frosted window. She remembered Mason's third birthday. The one with the outer space theme. She had made a rocket cake from scratch and worn silver earrings shaped like tiny planets. Mason had called her Commander Grandma and saluted every time she passed him a napkin. That day, Scarlett had smiled at her. Maybe the last time. "You make things too special," she'd said, almost annoyed. Charlotte had brushed it off as tiredness. Now she realized it had probably been jealousy. Threat. Fear of being overshadowed. Scarlett hadn't just pushed her out. She had seen her as competition. For influence. For control. Charlotte exhaled, slow and heavy, as though years of denial were being released into the air. Then she tore off the top page of the notepad and wrote a single word in capital letters. Enough. She folded it, placed it on top of the documents, and stared at the small pile like it was a weapon she never wanted to use, but would. Then came the knock. Not on the door. In her chest. A heartbeat louder than the rest. A knowing. She wasn't just reclaiming a legal right. She was reclaiming her worth. Charlotte stood tall for the first time in months. Not from anger, not even for vengeance. But because somewhere, in a small bedroom across town, a little boy named Mason might one day ask why his grandma stopped coming around. And she needed to be ready with the truth, not just for him, but for herself. The Bombshell. Oregon, December 28, 2022. The air outside was bitter and colorless, like the sky had forgotten how to be blue. Charlotte sat at her small kitchen table, the same one that had hosted birthday cupcakes, Thanksgiving pies, and every Christmas morning breakfast before the distance settled in like frost. In front of her lay the documents Joan had confirmed, the refinance paperwork with the forged signature, side by side with notarized proof from 2 years ago. Indisputable. Illegal. But none of it stung the way the folded sheet of paper in her hands did. It had come to her in secret, quietly slipped into her life through a back door of kindness. 20 minutes earlier, Charlotte had gotten a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi Miss Charlotte, it's Lisa from Mason's daycare. I probably shouldn't be reaching out, but I found something I thought you should see. He left it in his cubby. Are you home?" Charlotte had dropped everything and driven straight to the small daycare center tucked behind the old library downtown. Lisa had met her at the side entrance like they were exchanging state secrets. Now, back in her kitchen, Charlotte gently unfolded the paper Lisa had handed her like it might break in her fingers. It was drawn in crayon, thick, blocky strokes. A child's world in primary colors. There was a house with a green roof and 4 stick figures. 3 were standing outside, 2 taller ones and a smaller one between them. They were smiling, holding hands. But off to the right was a 4th figure, separated, boxed behind a crooked blue square meant to be a window. The figure was frowning. Heavy scribbles of blue clouded around it like rain. At the bottom, in Mason's unmistakable kindergarten lettering, were the words, "Grandma is outside." Charlotte's breath hitched. The room didn't spin, but something inside her shifted. A fault line in her chest cracked just a little deeper. She ran her fingers over the crayon lines, slow, almost reverent. As if Mason himself were there beside her, trying to explain what he couldn't say out loud. Children didn't lie in pictures. They didn't edit for diplomacy. They just told the truth. In color, Scarlett had done worse than cut Charlotte out of the mortgage. Worse than forging a name. She had locked her out of her grandson's reality. And Mason? He saw it. He felt it. He drew it. Charlotte's tears came quietly. Not the kind that racked your body or left you gasping. These were soft, steady, purposeful. She had been holding too much for too long, and now the dam had cracked. She stood, crossed the room, and taped the drawing to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a Christmas tree. She looked at it again. It wasn't just a picture. It was evidence. It was grief. It was a declaration of war. Charlotte walked back to the table and picked up her phone. She opened her text thread with Nathan, the one that had been silent since before Thanksgiving, and attached a photo of the drawing. No message. No lecture. Just the image. He needed to see it. To sit with it. The way she had. 10 minutes passed. Then her phone buzzed. "Nathan, I saw it." Another buzz. "Nathan, what did he say when he drew it?" Charlotte responded immediately. "He told Lisa he missed me. That's all." She didn't expect a reply. But then, a minute later, "Nathan, Scarlett told him you're too busy now. That you don't want to see him." Charlotte blinked. Her hands trembled again, this time from fury. She called him. He picked up after the second ring. "Nathan," she said quietly, voice firm but low. "That's a lie. And you know it." "I know," he whispered. I didn't know she told him that until tonight. He said it while we were brushing teeth. Like it was fact. "You let her do this," she said, voice cracking but steady. "You let her erase me." There was silence. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten, Mom. I thought, God, I don't know what I thought." "Then let me make it clear," she snapped, the heartbreak finally cutting clean. "Your son is drawing his grandmother as an outsider. A ghost behind glass. What he's learning, what you're allowing, is that love is conditional. That it can be revoked if someone decides they don't like how it looks." "I'm sorry." "You keep saying that," she said. "But you haven't done a thing to change it." He exhaled. "I'm coming by. Tomorrow. Alone." Charlotte didn't answer. She just hung up. She turned off the lights, let the dim glow of the fridge cast a soft hue over the drawing, and poured herself a glass of water. Her body ached, not from age, but from carrying. From holding it all together for so long. The next day, Nathan came. Alone. He stood in the doorway, holding a paper grocery bag and a defeated look on his face. He looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Charlotte let him in. They didn't hug. He sat at the table and stared at the crayon drawing like it was a police lineup. "She said you were trying to take the house," he mumbled. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "She forged my name, Nathan. You don't get to flip this." "I know. I'm not defending her." "Then what are you doing?" Nathan reached into the bag and pulled out a folder. "I printed everything I could find. Bank records, texts, screenshots, emails. There's a hidden PayPal account under her sister's name. That's where the refinance money went." Charlotte stared at the folder. "You're testifying?" she asked. "Yes. Even if it means losing custody?" His voice cracked. "If Mason grows up believing it's okay to lie and manipulate to get what you want, then I don't deserve custody." Charlotte's heart cracked open again, but this time it let something else in. Not a naive hope, but a mature one. One born of pain and choice. She poured them both coffee and they sat in silence. Two people trying to rebuild something that used to be called family. Later that night, when Nathan had left, she taped another page to the fridge. A yellow legal pad page that simply read, "We fix what we can." For the ones still watching. Charlotte stood back, looked at Mason's drawing, and whispered to the quiet kitchen. "I'm still here, baby. I'm not behind glass anymore. I'm coming back." And for the first time since Christmas morning, she believed it. December 30th, 2022, a motel outside of Bend, Oregon. Nathan didn't remember falling asleep. He just remembered the sound of traffic, sporadic, distant, blending with the hum of the motel heater and the flicker of the bathroom light he'd left on, afraid the dark might hold truths he wasn't ready to face. The room smelled faintly of bleach and something else, cheap cologne maybe, or the ghosts of previous guests. He sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, elbows on his knees, staring at the beige carpet. In his lap was a crumpled drawing. Mason's. A new one. A stick figure with a small suitcase. The caption underneath read, "Dad's leaving the madhouse." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mason hadn't meant it to be funny. The kid was trying to make sense of it all in the only language he knew, crayon and construction paper. But the brutal honesty of it all, it cut deep. The phone on the nightstand vibrated. A message from Charlotte. "Are you alone?" He replied simply, "Yes. Can I come over?" Her response came seconds later. "Always." An hour later, Nathan stood in the doorway of his mother's apartment, a plastic grocery bag in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. He looked exhausted, worn at the edges, like a man who had been running too long without knowing the finish line had moved. Charlotte opened the door. She didn't reach for a hug. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come in." The warmth of her apartment hit him first, not just the heat, but the smell. Lemon cleaner and something baking. It felt like memory. "Sit," she said, motioning to the kitchen table. He did, placing the envelope carefully on the table between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I left," Nathan said finally, his voice quieter than she expected. "Mason's with Scarlett's sister for a few days. I couldn't take it anymore." Charlotte didn't ask what he meant. She waited. "I've been sleeping on that motel mattress for 3 nights, he said with a small, hollow laugh. "It's terrible. But somehow, it still felt more honest than my own bed." She looked at him, not as her child, but as a man unraveling at the seams. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm guilt out of his skin. "Mom, I need to tell you something. And I'm not proud of it." Charlotte nodded slowly, heart steady but bracing. "When Scarlett brought up refinancing last spring, I told her no. I said you needed to be involved, that it wasn't right to do it without you." He swallowed hard. She got angry. Said we'd lose the house if we waited. Said if you found out, you'd just use it as leverage to control us. "Did you sign anything?" Charlotte asked. "No. But when the paperwork came back, and your signature was there, I didn't stop her." His voice cracked. "I saw it. I knew it wasn't yours. But I looked the other way." Charlotte's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "Why?" "Because I was scared." She said she'd leave. Take Mason. Move in with her sisters in Utah. Said I'd never see them again. I believed her. Charlotte looked down at the table. Her hand drifted to the envelope. "So you chose silence." "I chose fear," he said, ashamed. "I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. That you'd never find out. That it was just paperwork. But it wasn't. It was your name. Your life." She tapped the envelope lightly with one finger. "What's in here?" "Everything. Texts, bank statements, screenshots. The PayPal account she opened. It's all in her name or her sister's." "You were right." Charlotte opened the envelope and flipped through the papers. It was all there. More than she expected. More than she was prepared for. "You're willing to testify?" she asked, voice even. "I will," he said. "Even if it costs me everything." Her eyes narrowed. "Even Mason?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, "If I let him grow up thinking lying is love, then I've already lost him." Something in Charlotte softened. Not because she forgave him, not yet, but because, for the first time in years, she saw the boy she raised, the one who used to bring her dandelions in a sweaty palm and say, "I picked it just for you." "You know," she said, pushing the folder aside, "you broke my heart. Not just with what you did, but with what you didn't say." Nathan blinked. "I thought I was protecting my family." "You were protecting Scarlett's version of it," she said. "You weren't protecting your son from losing a grandmother who braided his hair into stars with cookie dough on her hands." He laughed through a tear. "He still talks about that." Charlotte exhaled, long and quiet. "He asked me the other day," Nathan said softly, "Dad, why doesn't Grandma come anymore? Did she stop loving me?" Charlotte's lips parted, but no sound came out. She pressed a hand to her chest like it might keep her from splitting open. "I didn't know what to say," Nathan added. "So I told him the truth. That I made a mistake. That adults make them too." Charlotte reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time in years she had touched him with anything other than guarded grace. "You're doing the right thing now," she said. Nathan nodded. "I just don't know if it's too late." "It's not," she said firmly. "But you have to keep showing up. Every day. Not just when it's easy." He nodded again. They sat in silence for a moment, not because there was nothing left to say, but because sometimes the most honest conversations live in quiet. Then Charlotte stood, walked to the fridge, and returned with the crayon drawing. She placed it between them. "This was the moment I stopped hoping you'd fix it," she said, "and started deciding I would." Nathan looked down at Mason's drawing. "He saw it all, didn't he?" "He did," she said. "And he still does." Nathan wiped his eyes, shoulders heavier but his spine finally straighter. "I want to be better, Mom," he whispered. "Not just for him, but for me." Charlotte nodded. "Then start now." He stood, gathered his things, and paused at the door. "Thanks for letting me in." "You were always allowed in," she replied. "You just had to knock." When the door closed, Charlotte looked down at the drawing one more time. But it didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like a beginning. January 25, 2023, Edge of the Pines, Oregon. The house sat at the end of a gravel road where mailboxes leaned sideways, and the only sounds at night were wind through trees and the occasional rustle of deer on dry leaves. It wasn't much. Not by realtor standards. A faded one-story with cracked siding and shutters that had once been blue but now looked like washed denim. The chimney leaned slightly to the left, and the fence in the back looked more like suggestion than security. But it had two things that Charlotte hadn't felt in a long time: silence and sovereignty. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The keys still felt foreign in her hand, not because she didn't know it, but because no one had ever given it to her. Not a husband. Not a son. Not a contract buried under someone else's decisions. This time, it was hers. Boxes were stacked in the living room, mismatched labels scrawled in black marker: cookware, books, photos, old plus sacred, Mason's things, maybe. She left them untouched for now. Instead, Charlotte crossed the worn wood floor, creaking in honest places, and stood in the center of her new living room. A fireplace she intended to clean. Windows she'd dress with second-hand curtains. A space she would fill not with apology, but with intention. She looked out the window and saw the old school down the road. Mason's school. That had been the deciding factor, really. She didn't need proximity to a supermarket or a community pool. What she wanted, what she fought for, was a place close enough that, one day, when the dust of betrayal and paperwork and court hearings settled, her grandson could walk down that sidewalk, knock on her door, and know he'd be welcome. No need to ask. No gatekeepers. No middlemen with cold voices and forged signatures. Just her. And him. Charlotte took off her coat, folded it over a dining chair, and walked to the kitchen. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and sawdust, evidence of her hard-earned fresh start. The sink had a minor leak and the refrigerator hummed too loudly, but she didn't care. It was quiet noise. Peaceful noise. The real kind of peace. The kind you earn. The kind you bleed for. She opened a cupboard. Empty shelves. She opened another, just one chipped mug with a faded design. World's best grandma. She had bought it for herself at a thrift store 6 years ago, back when Mason was a baby and Scarlett still pretended to tolerate her. Charlotte filled the mug with hot water, dropped in a tea bag, and carried it out onto the small back porch. The wood beneath her feet was cold, but sturdy. No rut. No wobble. The trees behind the fence swayed like they were sighing in time with her. She sat down on the single porch chair she'd unpacked that morning, tucked a blanket around her lap, and let the steam from her tea curl up toward her face. It had taken 3 weeks from the day she filed to the day the judge ruled in her favor. Scarlett had left town 2 days before the hearing. No notice, no message, no acknowledgement. Her lawyer cited emotional strain and temporary relocation. Charlotte called it running. The judge called it evasion. The audit confirmed what Charlotte and Nathan already knew. Over $34,000 of home equity had been funneled into Scarlett's personal accounts. Handbags, a luxury spa membership, plane tickets to Utah for visits with her sisters, and at least one emergency expense for a Botox package. The judge signed off on the motion to sell. Charlotte signed her name beneath it, this time with pride. The sale happened faster than anyone expected. The housing market was desperate for anything under $200,000, and after penalties, legal fees, and joint equity, Charlotte walked away with something she hadn't had in years. Freedom backed by numbers. Enough to start over. Enough to buy this. A home that didn't require explanation. Charlotte sipped her tea, let the heat settle in her chest, and looked at the backyard. Wild grass. An old tire swing hanging on its last rope. A rusted metal birdbath missing its basin. She'd fix the swing. She'd paint the shutters again, maybe green, like Mason's favorite color. Inside, a small bulletin board leaned against the wall, ready for photos and hand-drawn pictures. She had already saved 2 magnets, one shaped like a star, the other like a dinosaur. Both were from Mason's old birthday parties. They would hold the drawing he made, the one where Grandma is outside, not as a wound, but as a reminder. A promise that she would never again accept being left behind in her own story. Her phone buzzed beside her on the porch railing. It was a picture message from Nathan. A photo of Mason standing in front of his school, grinning, holding a paper with a gold star on it. He got a reading award, the message read. He wanted to bring it to show you this weekend. Charlotte's hand went to her chest, and she exhaled a slow breath. Relief didn't come like a tidal wave. It came like the steady stream of a faucet just turned on. She stared at the photo, memorizing every pixel. He was coming. Not just physically, but emotionally. She replied, "Tell him I have something to show him too. A backyard. A tire swing. A house that smells like cookies and forgiveness." Another message popped up. He said he wants to help hang stuff on the fridge. Charlotte smiled. Her fridge was still empty. Still waiting. That night, she unpacked a little more. Hung the curtains. Wrote a grocery list that included juice boxes and mini marshmallows. She pulled out the telescope, the gift from Christmas that had never been opened, and set it near the front window. She didn't want to forget what she had lost. But she wasn't going to live there anymore. This place, this quiet home on the edge of the woods, wasn't about proving anything to Scarlett, or even reclaiming the past. It was about rebuilding forward. Brick by quiet brick. Room by chosen room. Charlotte stood in the doorway of her new home, tea in hand, soft night air pressing against her skin, and whispered, "This time, I'm not showing up for anyone else's sake. Just mine." And for the first time in years, the thought of being alone didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. February 2023, Charlotte's new home, Oregon. The paint fumes still clung to the walls, mingling with the scent of grilled cheese and old wood. The living room looked different now. The pale yellow Charlotte had chosen for the walls made the space feel warmer, less like a holding place for memories and more like a canvas for new ones. Nathan was on a ladder, carefully brushing trim with the kind of precision that only comes after you've messed it up twice and your mother's watching. A smear of white paint streaked across the side of his neck where he'd absent-mindedly scratched. Charlotte sat on the floor nearby, painting the baseboards. Her knees ached, but she didn't complain. She was too absorbed in the rhythm of it, the steady back and forth of the brush, the satisfaction of clean lines, the quiet company of her son. Not much was said that morning. But it didn't have to be. Growth didn't come in declarations. It came in small acts. In showing up. In staying when it was easier to leave. Outside, the early spring sun filtered through the leafless trees, casting shadows across the lawn. The tire swing still hung in the backyard, and the fence was halfway done. They'd rebuilt it together last weekend, Nathan hammering the boards, Charlotte measuring, both of them laughing at how crooked the first few slats turned out. They'd gotten better by the third panel. Like anything, it took practice. So did forgiveness. "You missed a spot," Charlotte said, pointing to a strip of bare wood above the window. Nathan leaned over on the ladder. "I was testing you." Charlotte smirked. "You failed." He dipped the brush back into the tray. "Story of my life." She paused, brush in midair. That would have once stung to hear, from him, from herself. But not today. She let it sit. Didn't rush to comfort. Didn't rush to fix. Just painted another stroke. An hour later, the front door creaked open. "Mason," Charlotte called without looking up. "Grandma," his voice rang back, full of delight and momentum. He barreled into the room, carrying a drawing in one hand and a zippered lunchbox in the other. Nathan climbed down just in time to catch him in a side hug. Charlotte wiped her hands on a rag and knelt down, arms open. Mason didn't hesitate. He ran straight into her, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "I made you something," he said. Charlotte looked into his freckled face, into the eyes that always seemed to carry more truth than his age could hold. "What is it?" she asked. He unfolded the drawing like it was treasure. It showed a house, small and green, with 3 stick figures standing in front. A swing in the yard. A sun in the corner. And above it all, a banner written in big purple letters. "Our home." Charlotte blinked. "You drew us." Mason nodded proudly. "That's you and Daddy and me. I even made the swing." Her eyes stung. The window no longer separated them. The blue scribbles of loneliness had been replaced with green grass and a bright yellow sun. A child's unspoken forgiveness, drawn in crayon. She kissed the top of his head and stood, pinning the drawing to the fridge next to the others. The sad ones stayed. She didn't remove them. They were part of the journey, after all. But now they had company. Mason skipped to the living room, picked up a paintbrush from the floor, and started helping by smearing a line of color across the baseboard. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Nathan chuckled. "Creative license." Charlotte shrugged. "At least he's inside the lines, mostly." That night, they ate dinner on the floor. No dining table yet, just picnic style, bowls of chili, crackers, and warm cider. The 3 of them sat cross-legged, Mason curled into Charlotte's side like a cat. Nathan leaned against the wall, sipping his drink. "You know, I don't remember the last time we did this." "What, ate chili?" she teased. "No. This," he said, gesturing around the room. Laughed. "Sat together. Felt right." Charlotte nodded slowly. "It's been a while. I've thought a lot about what I said," Nathan continued, "and what I didn't say. About what I allowed Scarlett to become in our lives." Charlotte waited. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault. That she was the one who changed. But I think part of me changed too. I got tired. Passive. I let her lead because I didn't know who I was without her." "That happens," Charlotte said softly. "Especially when we think survival means silence." He looked up. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I was," she said, her eyes warm but steady. "But I learned something too." "What's that?" "That anger doesn't rebuild fences. Nails and time do." He let that sit. Mason looked up from his bowl. "What's rebuild fences mean?" Nathan smiled. "It means when people hurt each other, they don't just say sorry. They show up and fix what's broken." Mason tilted his head. "Like the swing." "Exactly," Charlotte said, running her hand through his hair. "Just like the swing." After Mason had fallen asleep on the couch under a mountain of blankets, Charlotte and Nathan stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp, stars flickering above the tree-line. Nathan leaned on the railing. "You ever think we'd be here?" "No," Charlotte admitted. But I hoped. He looked at her. Hope's risky. It is, she said. But it's worth it. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind through the trees, the quiet breathing of a house that was starting to feel lived in. Nathan finally said, "You think Mason will remember this?" Charlotte smiled. "Maybe not the paint or the fence, but he'll remember the feeling. And you?" She looked over at him. "I'll remember that you came back, not because you had to fix things, but because you finally wanted to." Nathan nodded. Then, just before heading in, he said something that caught Charlotte off guard, but in the best way. "I'm not done yet," he said. "I still have more nails to hammer. More fences to build." She smiled and opened the door. "Good," she said, "because I bought extra paint." March 3rd, 2023, Charlotte's porch, Oregon. The scent of cinnamon and roasted vegetables filled the house, curling through the hallway, wrapping itself around the picture frames and fresh paint like it belonged there. Outside, the sun had long dipped behind the pines, leaving only soft layers of twilight hanging across the yard. Charlotte stood at the stove, stirring gravy, listening for footsteps. Not in fear, but in anticipation. She set the table with 3 mismatched plates, 2 ceramic, 1 plastic, and poured cider into mason jars. She folded the napkins with extra care, even though she knew Mason would unfold his within 2 seconds. She did it anyway. These small rituals, once abandoned in silence and grief, now felt sacred. The porch light flicked on. Then, just as she was placing the honey on the table, came the voice that never failed to undo her heart. "Grandma, we brought the apple pie." Charlotte smiled. That high, excited pitch, Mason's, was impossible to mistake. She walked to the door and opened it. There he was, bundled in a red puffer jacket, cheeks rosy from the cold, holding a Tupperware container like it was treasure. Behind him stood Nathan, carrying a scraggly little pine tree, the kind you wouldn't find in stores but only in wild places. There was dirt clinging to the roots, a few pine cones tangled in its branches. "It's not perfect," Nathan said sheepishly. "But Mason said every house needs a tree, even in March." Charlotte looked at them both, heart swelling. "I couldn't agree more," she said, stepping aside. "Come in. Dinner's ready." Mason bolted past her with the pie, yelling, "I call the blue chair," as if it were a rule etched in law. Nathan followed slowly, placing the little pine near the fireplace. "I figured we could plant it in the yard this weekend," he said. "If the ground isn't too frozen." Charlotte nodded. "I saved a spot near the swing. Good light. Room to grow." Nathan met her eyes, and for a second, something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. A season had changed. Inside, Mason was already pulling drawings out of his backpack. "I made more pictures for the fridge," he said. "This one's us making s'mores. And this one's Daddy fixing the fence." Charlotte sat next to him, brushing his hair gently behind his ear. "Let's hang them up after dinner, okay?" "Okay," he beamed. They ate by candlelight. Not because it was fancy, but because Mason liked the glow. He said it made the food taste warmer. Charlotte didn't argue. She served mashed potatoes with rosemary, honey-roasted carrots, and baked chicken she basted until the skin was golden and crisp. Nathan went back for seconds. Mason went back for thirds. It was the kind of meal that didn't need to be documented on a phone or framed. It lived in the laughter and the passing of bread and the way Charlotte's kitchen no longer echoed with silence. After dessert, apple pie with a drizzle of honey, Charlotte led them to the fridge. She took Mason's newest drawing and placed it beside the others. The image was simple: 3 figures sitting on a porch, a string of lights overhead, a small fire pit glowing beside them. All smiling. Underneath, in bold red crayon, were the words, "This is our home." Charlotte swallowed, then gently pressed the drawing into place with a small wooden magnet shaped like a shooting star. Nathan stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The next morning, Charlotte found Mason still asleep on the couch, surrounded by a fort of pillows. Nathan had left early for work but left a note on the table. "Did the swing creak too much? I'll tighten it this weekend." She smiled and folded the note, slipping it between the pages of her journal. Later that day, Charlotte sat on the porch, sipping her tea while the wind rustled the pine needles and the sky stretched wide and blue. She looked out at the swing set, now properly anchored, and the small patch of soil where they would plant the little tree. She thought back to that first night, the night she stood on her son's porch holding cookies and hope, and was turned away like a ghost no one wanted to see. She had walked away with hands full, but heart empty. Now, months later, she sat on her own porch, hands empty, heart full. The house was small, and the budget was tight. But no one could forge her name here. No one could erase her value or lock her behind a window. She had earned this peace. Not by winning, but by refusing to disappear. Mason came outside, dragging a blanket behind him. "Cold?" she asked. He nodded. She opened her arms and he crawled into her lap, curling into her like he used to when he was 3. He was taller now. Smelled like crayons and shampoo. "Grandma," he said quietly, "this house feels like a secret fort." "It kind of is," she whispered back. "But it's our secret fort. No passwords. No locks." He giggled. "Can I bring my telescope next time?" "Of course. You know the sky looks different out here." "Why?" "Because you're with someone who sees it with you." They sat there for a long time. No words. No urgency. Just the porch light flickering on as the sun went down, and the wind through the evergreens sounding like waves. Charlotte knew in that moment that nothing would ever be perfect. Mason would grow. Nathan would stumble again. And Scarlett might someday resurface, demanding things she never earned. But this quiet, this connection, this earned stillness, was the kind of joy that didn't fear being taken. Because it wasn't borrowed. It was built. When Mason finally drifted off against her shoulder, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "You make every place feel like home, little one." Inside, the fridge glowed with colors. Crayon suns, stick figures holding hands, houses with open doors. A timeline not just of recovery, but of resurrection. And on the bottom of the fridge, stuck with a magnet shaped like a moon, was a single line Mason had written a week ago. Grandma didn't leave. She just came back stronger. And oh, how true that was. Charlotte sat on the porch with the last bit of daylight lingering in the sky. The mug in her hands had gone lukewarm, but she didn't care. Mason's laughter still echoed faintly from inside the house, mixing with the creak of the swing in the backyard. There was no drama left. No courtroom battles, no documents to sign. Just breath and breeze and peace. She'd spent months trying to fix something that was never meant to be repaired the way it had been broken. Scarlett hadn't just lied, she'd tried to erase. And Nathan, well, he had looked away when it mattered most. But here they were now, not in a picture-perfect ending, but in something real. Something earned. That was the thing no one ever told you. Family isn't always safe. Blood doesn't guarantee kindness. Marriage doesn't mean loyalty. A shared last name doesn't ensure a shared heart. She had learned that the hard way. But she had also learned that you get to redefine what family means. You get to draw new lines, open new doors, and say, "This is who I let in now." Love wasn't supposed to be silent. It wasn't meant to cower in the corner while control paraded around in the name of sacrifice. Real love showed up. It held you accountable. It fought for your place, not out of obligation, but out of belief that you mattered. Forgiveness, Charlotte realized, didn't mean forgetting the damage. It meant building again, slowly, painfully, on the ashes of what was. It meant letting go of the version of the past you wished had existed, and working with the truth in front of you. Tonight, that truth looked like a tired son learning how to parent differently. It looked like a grandson drawing smiles instead of sorrow. And it looked like a woman in her 60s who finally stopped asking for permission to belong. She placed her mug on the railing and whispered, not to anyone in particular, but maybe to her younger self. You didn't lose your family. You just had to find the part worth keeping. And in that moment, she knew. Home isn't a place. It's a choice you make, again and again, to love with your eyes open.